Welcome to Mentor Monday. I know it's a Wednesday. The question in Mentor Monday this week was, what is a key pose? If you've been creating sequences or thinking about or studying how to create sequences, you might come across the phrase key poses. What are key poses? In a general class or a beginner's class or a mixed ability class where you don't know the people that you're teaching, you're probably better off teaching pre-poses, which are a warm-up. We talked about that before. Key poses and post poses only. What does she mean? To understand the words key poses, you might have to understand the words peak poses. And if you've heard peak poses, they're the really challenging poses. But let's go back to key poses. So you have your sequencing and you have your, what we would call the crescendo of a class. So the crescendo of a class is the most challenging bit before you move the students back down into stillness. So we're always challenging the nervous system. We have to have a mix of challenge and rest, proprioception and interoception, nervous system response and myofascial system response. So a really good way to work is to have a crescendo in your class. So you get the most challenging pose or poses depending on the ability of the class, and then you begin to wind down into stillness. There were categories of poses, I understand, within sequencing, and that's for another time. But key poses are poses that are nearest to the poses that people in their normal lives do. So, walk. A key pose would be anything that could be associated with walk. So chair could be associated with walk. Actually, tree could be associated with walk because we spend some of our time on one foot when we're walking. Warrior one could most definitely be associated with walk because it looks a little bit like that. Warrior two could also be associated with walk because you have 2 feet on the floor, you have a big base of support. A standing forward fold could also be associated with walk, but it can also be associated with forward folds, because another thing that we do in everyday life is forward fold. So forward folds would also be key poses. That's not to say that forward folds aren't challenging for people. We know that people who have tight hamstrings or tight back line find forward folds challenging, but they are accessible in some form or other to people who've walked into your class. So basically, if people have walked in uninjured, key poses mimic what they do in everyday life. Twists are key poses. People twist in everyday life. You reach into the back of the car to get something. Back bends are key poses, but the level of them is what makes them move from key to peak. Shoulder bridge, fantastic key pose because it is closed chain. In other words, the body is on the floor and gravity is your friend. You can push your legs into the floor to lift yourself up. Cobra is a key pose. Cobra is a key pose. Every baby in the world does this at a few months old. Cobra is definitely key. Salabhasana is a key pose. because we need to extend the hip for walk. We need to be able to let the arm swing back and forwards for walk, and I have my little back extension for that. So a good rule for identifying key poses is, are they similar to walk? What happens in walk? 2 feet on the ground, 1 foot on the ground. 80% of your time in walk is on 1 foot. So within reason, one-legged balance poses are key poses. Gentle twists, as in the spine is only twisting, are key poses. Gentle back bends are key poses. And side bending is a key pose. When we add more than one plane of movement, and when we add our eyes facing a different direction from our feet, we go into the territory of maybe this is a peak pose. So, warrior 1 is definitely a key pose. This is a high lunge, excuse me. High lunge is definitely a key pose. But when we add to that a rotation and a different direction with the eyes to the feet, it becomes a peak pose. When we add, for example, a one-legged balance plus a rotation, it becomes a peak pose. So key poses are where both feet are on the floor, or there's a big base of support, or they're simple balances, simple twists, simple side bending, simple back bending. When we add more than one spinal position, it might come into the cusp, onto the cusp of between a key pose and a peak pose. So if you have a mixed ability class and you don't know your people and you don't know their history, you're better off doing lots and lots of key poses instead of straying into peak poses. When you get a class that's more experienced, when you get people who've been doing yoga for a longer time, when you know that they're injury free, you can begin to add peak poses. We're going to talk about peak poses later. So what I'd love you to do is to go and find as many key poses as you think you can. And if you get to a pose that you don't know whether it's key or peak, try it a few times. And if you still aren't decided, let me know and we'll try and figure it out together. Obviously, there are ones that go between key and peak also. I hope that helped.